Welcome to Lawyer Business Advantage. This podcast is dedicated to helping attorneys earn more money, get better clients, and spend more time with family. I'm your host, Alay and founder of Law Firm Success Group. Smart business guidance for small law firms begins in 3, 2, 1. And it's my pleasure to welcome back to Lawyer Business Advantage, Belle Walker, founder and CEO of Bellevue Consulting. Belle, how are you?
I am doing great. It is fabulous to be back.
It's great to have you back. What a wonderful way to wrap up the week. We get to have a chat and wrap up our Friday afternoon. Last time you were on the show, we talked a lot about process and the value of process for law firms and systems. Now that can be really useful. And I'm really excited for our conversation today because today we get to tell a story, or you get to tell a story, and the attorney entrepreneurs get to listen. So we're actually going to go into a case study about how process mapping has helped one of your actual clients. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. There's a couple of ways that this particular client was struggling. And so I'm hoping that one or two things will resonate for some of the listeners out there.
Well, I'm really excited to be doing this with you because also this podcast is now on YouTube, which means we now get to show visuals, which is going to be super helpful when we're talking about process maps. So attorney entrepreneurs, if you want to see what Belle's talking about, jump over to the YouTube channel, Lawyer Business Advantage. You can catch it there. But let's jump into a story. So I'll start. Once upon a time, and then you jump in.
Yeah, so once upon a time, there was a law firm. They were not a super large law firm, fairly small, but they've been around for quite a while. And then they had some mergers, they had some growth, they had some contractions, they were back in growth mode. And the partners looked up and realized we aren't totally clear on how money flows through the business, how it's handled. Good news, we've got fabulous staff. We're not worried about the money, but it is a little bit of a business risk to be completely dependent on the one or two people who do understand how this is going. And it might be nice to learn a little more about how our invoicing process works, how all of these back end pieces of our business function in case something does happen.
Got it. And but what size firm was it?
This was a 3 partner firm.
Okay, 3 partner firm. About how many total attorneys do you know?
I believe they only had 4. It was
Less
primarily
than 10,
partners.
yeah.
Yeah, less than 10. Oh, definitely less than 10
Okay. All right, so we're
lawyers in there.
talking small law firm. And so it's a small law firm. Like it's not like it's this enormous law firm where they're trying to figure out what the money's going. This is a small law firm. There's not a lot of places for the money to go.
Not a lot of places for the money to go. And as you'll see when we get into this, it's not like the partners were uninvolved in the processes. um, but there were pieces that were just beyond their line of sight that benefited from a little bit of retrospection and
And so
introspection.
what was the impact that this problem was having on the partners and on the firm?
Yeah, so we discovered in the course of the work that we did that there were actually probably 3 or 4 hours a month per partner that they were spending on invoicing that they didn't need to be.
Got
So
it.
we will get into how we address that, but they didn't even know that that was a pain point going in. They really didn't have an acute pain. They had a sudden realization that they could end up in a really bad place if very quickly if something went wrong. And so this was a little bit more proactive than a lot of people I work with. And I'll be honest, I wish more of my clients were in the proactive mode because it is so nice to prevent the problems versus fixing the problems.
Sure is. Sure is. And all you employment law attorneys are absolutely nodding your heads.
Yeah.
But it does create more work for consultants when we have to go in and clean up a big mess. So there is that too. So this firm was pretty smart and savvy. They brought you in, before everything flew apart. Um, what was kind of your approach with them, or how did you get started?
Yeah, so the getting started was a pretty straightforward set of conversations. I really sat down with their kind of I would say finance team, but it was really their sort of office administrator, finance person, a key staff member who had been with the firm a long
Sure.
time, wore all the hats, and talked to her and her assistant to really understand what each of them were doing on a monthly basis, how both the flow as the partners were seeing into it, as the clients were impacted, and what was happening behind the scenes on the back end. So really started with just words and conversations, and only then did we start turning it into visuals.
And in those conversations, you were having these conversations. I'm assuming the partners were off lawyering, so they
Hmm.
probably weren't in those conversations. I don't know if you've ever had a client wanting to be in those conversations with you, but I'd love to get your perspective on the value you brought to those conversations versus the attorneys just saying, "Hey, we have this problem. We don't know Bell exists. We just know we have this problem, and we're just going to go fact find and figure this out." What were some of the advantages and efficiencies that you brought to the party?
Yeah, I mean, one is bluntly, I am less expensive than an hour of their partner's time. So even if the partner was going to do the exact same thing, it was just cheaper for it to be my hours than their hours. But realistically, I think I have experience around what the right questions to ask are. And hopefully that is something that resonates with the lawyers out there, because I know darn well I would not know the right questions to ask in an investigation for the employment lawyers, or to make sure that the visas are filled out correctly for the immigration attorneys. People spend years practicing, honing their skills, and what I do is no different. But I can give some examples. I One that for this particular firm is my absolute favorite, I come back to regularly. There was a part of their process where, to get all of the financial information into the right places, they were um, taking information that was in QuickBooks, printing out an export from QuickBooks, scanning that printout, and uploading it into QuickBooks.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. Now, this is one of those cases where I remember I emphasized at the beginning that this was a not a new firm. They had been around
Yeah.
for quite a long time. And so if you actually traced the evolution, it made perfect sense. There used to be two file cabinets. These were different elements of the process. Um, then one of the file cabinets turned into software. Eventually, at some point you still had to be printing information out to go in the other file cabinet. Eventually, that was also software. They didn't talk to each other, so they would print and scan to get it into PDF. And then there was an acquisition, and now QuickBooks owned both pieces of it. And so it was actually different sections of QuickBooks. But they did eventually realize, no, we don't really need to be going through this whole. So you could see how they got there. The key point here is that the way that was originally told to me was, we take the information from this client report and we input it into this separate database. And it would have been perfectly reasonable to just kind of check and say, move the information, copy the information, and make an assumption around what it took for that information to get from place A to place B. Part of my job is to dig in on offhand comments like that one and say, tell me more. What does it mean to have this information go from your client report into this database? Where does this database live? And that's how we revealed that whole little sub process. And of course, the people working in this firm are competent, rational
Right. Right.
humans. When they actually had to stop and spell it out for me and think about what they were doing, the woman I was talking to pretty much paused and looked at me and was like, I don't think we're going to do that anymore. I don't know that we need to write this down. This is not a process that's going to survive this conversation. But there had never been a reason to stop and think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and that firm like that that's been around for a long time, and people that have been around for a long time, they're used to doing things a certain way, and they don't often have the luxury of stepping aside and seeing if there's a better way to do things. And even if they did have the luxury to do that, they probably wouldn't know how to go about identifying, you know, what to do better and where there's duplication, where there's waste. Um,
I was saying that, and that's a great segue into some of the visuals I actually have for this client. So moving away from my favorite little tiny anecdote into a slightly deeper story around their invoicing process. We actually created for them this invoicing flow to help the partners really see what does it take to create all of the invoices that go out to clients every month.
this looks familiar. I mean, this is a lot of law firms have something like this for their invoicing flow, but take us through it, please.
Yeah, so at the start of the invoicing cycle, I think theirs was monthly, but this is, as you might be able to tell, a little bit of a genericized version to protect their intellectual property. At the start of their invoicing cycle, they created something called pre-bills. The partners were reviewing the pre-bills.
Yep.
This is probably familiar to a lot of your listeners. When
Yes.
there were corrections needed, the corrections were made. Then the invoices were generated. Then the partners would review the invoices. If there were more corrections, those were made. Then the partners would review the corrections, and you go through that loop until everything looks good. And then off it goes to clients.
So this is the initial flow.
This is the initial flow.
Okay.
And so here's where we get into the fun little counterintuitive part. What's about to pop up is the revised flow, and it has more boxes.
It does.
So it does. And so this is one of the cases where fewer steps does not always mean higher overall efficiency, because part of what we realized was that pre-bills, especially in the format that they were generating, were a phenomenal pain to review. And the reason they needed to be reviewed was because some of the uh, not the invoices coming out of the operating expense account, but there were other invoices where generating the invoice triggered the accounting software to move the money. And so the pre-bill had better be correct for those invoices, because as soon as you click generate, the money's gone, it's moved.
Hmm.
Um, but only those invoices. For the vast majority at this point in the practice's life, it used to be a lot of their clients were on that type of agreement, but now it was only a few. Um, and so actually there was really no need to review the pre-bills for all the other accounts. And so the first change we made was to only review the pre-bills for those, I call them type A here, accounts.
Okay. Let me back you up right there. I want
Yeah.
to make sure we're all clear on the initial and the revised. So the initial is
Oh,
what
yes.
they were doing, and the revised are, I guess, sounds like after you've mapped out the process, then these are your recommendations and changes to the process. Um, and when you started this whole project, the idea was that these partners just wanted to get some visibility into how this whole thing works. So that's the initial piece.
Yeah, and that's a really good call out. Thank you for sort of pausing and slowing down there, because as I was getting these different perspectives, I heard a lot of complaining, for lack of a better word, about the pre-bills. When we talked about the stage, it was, oh, these are so messy and it takes forever to review them and it's such a pain, and but it's so important from a quality perspective, and here's why. And so it was, that is something that I try to listen for. If something is everybody's favorite thing to complain about, does it actually have to exist? Does it have to
Mhm.
exist at the volume it currently exists? I know it takes away some of the fun if we don't get to complain about it anymore, but maybe there's something that that we could be doing to have a little less complaining.
Nice, nice. Yeah, because people complain because oftentimes they think this stuff is a waste of their time.
Right. And in this case, or it's in that intersection where they do not think it's a waste of their time, but it's painful and miserable. And that's actually what this pre-bill section was. Again, because once upon a time in this business, the vast majority of their clients were on this type of account. Like if there was a time when this shift would have made almost no difference,
Got it.
but
All
not
right,
where we were
cool.
today.
So
Uh,
that's that initial piece. Yeah, please continue taking us through this.
Yeah, so the invoicing cycle would start. The pre-bills would be generated for just those type A accounts. The partners would review the pre-bills just for those accounts. Corrections would be made, and then all the invoices get generated. That part was still the same.
Got it.
The next step, also the same, partners review all the invoices. Pretty important step, right? I think every lawyer out there wants to get at least an eye on the invoices, make sure that what's being billed is correct, no surprises for your clients. And if there were corrections, corrections needed to be made. The big change that we made on this new flow was that once those corrections were made, only the invoices that had changes or corrections went back to the partners for review. Um, and I bet there are largely two camps of listeners out there. There are the partners and listeners who are saying, well, duh, I already looked at the other ones. Why weren't they doing that before? And there are the folks who are saying, oh my goodness, you have a chance to look at all those invoices again and make sure they're all correct. Why wouldn't you do that? And so that second mindset was where these partners really started out. They knew that there weren't usually a ton of changes, but they were really concerned that they might have missed something in their initial review. And so they were looking forward to that. Well, they hated but valued that opportunity to look at the invoices again. And so we went back through their records and checked how often were they actually finding errors in an invoice the second time they looked at it. So it had passed that first review, but then when they were looking through it again,
Mhm.
they saw something wrong. And it turned out the answer was about one error per partner per year. And when they had that metric in place, that gave them the confidence for their firm, for their process to say, yeah, okay, we are willing to accept that one error in all of the invoices for all of my clients per year might sneak through, given the benefit of only looking at the invoices that have been modified for the second check.
Really cool. That's a nice way of getting everyone on board. But oh my gosh, going through all the records and invoices and conducting that data analysis. Wow, that sounds like a lot of work.
It wasn't actually as hard as it could have been because of the way the finance team had been tracking the errors they could actually see through the emails and the way the reporting went through. So,
Got it.
um, fortunately, it was not quite as big a lift as it could have been. But it was
Really
also in part because there were so few additional errors. It was pretty easy to see, yeah, when we look at these approval chains, we send it out the second time and then off it goes.
lovely. Thank you for sharing this with us, Belle. It's so awesome to look at this in a visual medium. For those of you that are on audio, just follow along, but it's a fairly standard invoicing flow. And Belle's described the type A pre-bills that were different and the idea of reviewing the edited invoices rather than reviewing all the invoices a second time and a third time and what have you. This was great, Belle. And um, what was the value that the firm got from implementing your recommendations?
So a couple key things. One, the partners understood what were all the steps. I mean, this is just a small piece of all of the back end accounting that was happening. And I'm pretty confident that after they reviewed the full set of documents, the partners promptly forgot almost everything that they had read. And that's okay because they had the process maps in this documentation and could come back to it at any time. So they had that sort of immediate knowledge to be able to sanity check and feel confident. And then they knew that they had this documentation that was not going anywhere that they could refer back to if they needed it. So that was kind of piece one that met the initial pain point. Piece two, there were some efficiencies we found for the finance team for the staff members to not print, scan, upload back into QuickBooks. Realistically, those were not huge cost savings, but every little bit helps. That last one, the visuals I showed, ended up saving the partners about 3 hours per partner per month. And
Very
that was
cool.
a pretty big lift.
That's awesome. So the ROI in your services in the first year is probably, I don't know, well over 30x.
Yes.
Wow, that is really cool, Belle. And tell us a little bit about some things that you're looking forward to in your consulting business over the next year or so.
Ooh, things that I'm looking forward to. I'm excited to start bringing on more team members. I feel like this is a good forum to talk about growth for my own firm as well, to support with this type of process mapping work. This is maybe not something that's super familiar to a lot of lawyers, but it's a really common practice in a lot of industrial systems engineering technical fields. And I find that that is a really great intersection with lawyers because both sets of people tend to think very systemically and in great detail, but I can bring in folks with that more process mapping, process oriented background and expose them to all these fun challenges. So that's
Very
one thing I'm
cool.
super looking forward to.
Yeah, that sounds awesome and really exciting. Yes, I think one of the cool things about these kinds of exercises is the attorneys don't know that they have these inefficiencies. They have no idea until that you're able to jump in there and uncover it for them. And so if you are an attorney entrepreneur and you have a law firm really of any size and you're thinking, oh yeah, that's not me, well, you don't really know. So, Belle, I know we're running out of time here today, but what are a couple of maybe symptoms or yellow flags that indicate, actually, I might benefit from some process mapping to address some of my issues in my firm.
Yeah, one great symptom is I'm not sure how this works, and I would like to know. Coming back to that initial question you asked around, could one of the partners really sit down and track and learn all of this? Probably. Is that going to be the most efficient way to get that knowledge delivered into your brain? Probably not. So that's symptom, and then symptom two, just feeling like there is something there that isn't as efficient as it could be, but darned if you know what it is. Because often we have that instinct, we can feel it, you hear yourself complaining, but you're not sure what to do about it. And you've got clients to serve. You don't have the time to really go hunting it down.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you've encountered this or not, but the other one might be that you maybe as a firm they've been running Clio for a while and they're using it for certain things and they feel like they could be using more, but they don't really know how they would adopt the additional functionality already built into Clio.
Yeah, that's a great example, right? Because the more clearly you can articulate all the work that's being done, the easier it is to then ask, is this specific piece something Clio can support?
Yep. Yep. Very cool. And Belle, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Through my website or through LinkedIn. The website is bellevueconsulting.com, BELLEVIEW, like Bell's View, consulting.com. And LinkedIn, I'm Belle K. Walker.
Belle, thank you so much for being on Lawyer Business Advantage today.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Lawyer Business Advantage podcast. One thing that would really help both us and other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you tune in to listen. And I want to hear from you, so connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you think of this episode. And if you are a solo or an owner of a small law firm, and you're looking to earn more money, attract better clients, or reduce your stress, we would love to talk with you to see how we can help. Request your free law firm assessment by visiting lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. Again, that URL is lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. We look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you for listening. My name is Alay Yajnik. Until next time, remember, you can seize freedom, you can embrace happiness, you can build your perfect practice.